Welcome to Assembly Unfiltered. I'm your host, Satchel, and co-founder of Assembly, the Learn to Earn platform. Assembly Unfiltered is a podcast about democracy, privacy, blockchain, politics, leadership, company culture, crypto, security, and startups. It's meant for anyone who believes that all of us are living in challenging, turbulent, and even exciting times. We're living in a moment ripe for dramatic change. We envision this as a podcast for our tribe, people who share an interest in how all these threads weave together for better communities. This is meant for our learners, voters, advertisers, civic organizations, tech geeks, developers, and employees. I hope you enjoy this episode of Assembly Unfiltered. All right, and welcome back. Today we're going to continue this journey around how do we apply UX thinking, product thinking for citizens. If we pull back and think we can apply technology to solve for democracy issues, for civic engagement, then we need to start thinking about how do we think about citizens and not just users. So user stories for tech-focused solutions to problems is very common. The whole jobs to be done framework has now become mainstream for product organizations. So I think we want to apply something similar for citizens, but I'm not using the term users, and that nomenclature shift is subtle but important. Because I think already there are plenty of companies, products that are already thinking about users. They think about users and users first. And so that's super valuable in terms of the very focused problem that they need to be solving for. The thing about them in terms of tightly defined personas. Are they a parent and they want to solve something for their kids? Are they a student? Are they someone who works in a supply chain? And so that's really valuable. And some of those same things are for citizens. So it could just sound like it's turns of phrases and it's really solving the same thing. But I actually think when we, instead of thinking about users, we're asking about citizens is in fact a way for us to get a true north for the persona. So users are trying to solve something and we're only focused on their user experience to get a job done with our singular product or feature. But I think when we say, let's think about them in terms of citizens, we establish a different true north in terms of how they affect society, how do they become informed, what is the broad strokes of whom we need to pull into the engagement. And I think a litmus test for citizens that can be very large, and I think that's one of the things that's exciting about blockchain is it actually starts to become a societal force. We see the growth of DeFi. We see a lot of the political conversation around Bitcoin. So it really isn't just some isolated technology. It really is infusing itself within public policy. And the litmus test for how well are we designing for citizens, I think, is every election. Because we know in every election, citizens need to vote. They have a sense of responsibility that they should vote. Many don't. Many are frustrated with the problem. So I wanted to frame this conversation, this episode around how do we think about citizens, not just users. Now, the question might come up, is there a market for solving citizen problems? And that we can tackle later. I believe if you can solve for the citizenship problem and you're doing so at scale, because many people are concerned about it and with different amounts of revenue available at their disposal as well as different objectives, it is certainly complicated, but I think it's one that can be solved. And that's what makes it actually exciting is because the blockchain and particularly the token economics allows different stakeholders within an interconnected ecosystem to all benefit if we can nail and understand each of their incentives and goals. So let's pull back and just start with, well, what are the problems that citizens face? And we know what the true north is. So our true north is we want citizens to be informed and engaged. And the litmus test is their willingness, their ability, their comfort level with voting and increasing that number as much as possible. And we're not going to look at the market. I think we can tackle that later after we address this sort of problems. But let's look at the problems. So the first one is there's lots of sources of information. Like, it's actually overwhelming. If when I'm looking up, say, a proposition that's going to be on the ballot in California, I Google the name, I see some news stories, I might see some information either from a journalist organization or from them or from like Ballotpedia, but it's a fair amount of places that I have to go. Add to that, as the closer it gets to election, then there's slates that get sent to me, voter guides, depending on which publication I'm reading, and then how much am I in social media, and then there's that bombardment of ads. So there's lots of information, but the information is actually complex. It's not easy to understand, whether it is determining who's a good local judge or DA, or just making a decision on a ballot measure. And I think we're seeing a lot of sort of citizen involvement with referendums, where citizens are actually voting on legislation, and there's a lot of information. It's very complicated. Now, the challenge that's associated with that complexity is, citizens are losing trust over what is a reliable source of information. I think this is also still very complicated to get at. We know that there's a lot of controversy, and we've covered that in other episodes around misinformation on social media, and so I think social media has really amplified a lot of the challenges. But I think there's also an underlying loss of trust over the institutions themselves, the political organizations, the candidates, the politicians, even the news sources and the journalists about, well, who's really going to tell me the truth? Similar issue. We have a lot of social media, whether it's YouTube or Twitter or Facebook, that are suggesting we can't trust that. And so I think that's a related problem for the citizen experience. So these social media platforms creating a very divisive, emotional, sort of limited dialogue, cancel culture, also makes it hard for somebody to ask legitimate questions or to post their opinion and then get reasoned feedback on why they should change their mind. It's more of a battlefield than a reasoned conversation, say you would have over let's say over dinner with people of different opinions, or watching a true debate as opposed to a staged debate. And then you mix into all this is just time. It does take time to sift through the information, to look at the different points of view, and then reach a conclusion. And this is hard to do. If you have, 10, 15, referendums and ballot initiatives, it's sort of hard to understand. You're reading this and like, oh, it's another bond issue. Okay, what does that mean? Oh, this is yet another change in procedures for, the boards of supervisors. Okay, why do I care? So there's a lot of things that are very difficult to tackle. So I think at the end of the day, it limits their willingness to be engaged and informed. And I think those are tightly related. The more someone feels informed, educated, they can trust their opinion, they trust the sources, the more likely they are to be engaged. And the engaged part comes from, I'm informed, I understand the issues, including how it affects me and how it affects my community, how it affects my children. And then engaged, meaning I feel like I have an understanding of the issues. I feel I can share it and discuss it with people. Those are the things that are around engagement. I think it's very limited right now. So who else should care about solving these range of problems and the sources of problems which are limiting engagement and information? So the first one are the political campaigns themselves. Right? They really do need to reach and influence them. And granted, each one has their own side, but if they can't get citizens to be actually informed and engaged, most campaigns are going to be concerned. Now, perhaps those that benefit from non-engagement and uninformed citizens, they don't care. But anything that's new, anything that's trying to be reformed, anything that's trying to correct an issue, they're going to want some kind of change. The second group are those civic organizations or issue organizations. So they can be organizations that just care about democratic participation in general. And then there's those that have issues. So they might be supporting the actual campaigns, but for them, the issue is an ongoing education issue for them. So it could be related to healthcare, or it could be related to education policy. And so while the campaigns are important, this ongoing education cycle for their audience is important because it affects the next election cycle, and it might indicate support perhaps for bills that need to get through. The third group that's starting to get more involved about the issue of citizen engagement are brands. They're seeing that brands, and we saw this happen in 2020, is that brands benefit and they want to be more involved to increase society participation, democracy, for a stronger economy, to stabilize business growth. So we saw a lot of organizations that were saying, hey, we want you to come out and vote in 2020. We want to give you resources so you know where to vote. And then some are seeing there's some benefits for their own brand in promoting to their customer base the fact that they're pro-democracy, not around a specific issue, but they care about democracy sort of in general. And that probably relates to some of this growth of ESG, but I think that this is a little bit more neutral because there are people on where the companies might have a leaning one way or the other, but in the end they still need to have people who are engaged and vote. So let's take a look at what the solution space can be when we've now identified the primary user, or the person persona we want to solve for is the citizen, and that true north is engagement and informed. We want them to be engaged as informed citizens. And other people care. They want more people to vote and who understand the issues. And those are the campaigns and issue organizations as well as brands. So the first part of it is it's a UX problem. Anything that involves time, complexity, there's confusion, making something understandable and accessible. So for example, instead of needing to go across multiple places and doing Google and then kind of like going through all the things, these ads that are popping up if you're on some, random blogging site, but that has a lot of information. It's really a single place that's portable, probably a mobile phone, that somebody can read and really understand it. And I would say related to the UX is a sense of trust. Are they seeing both sides? Do they feel that the content is over emotional? Are there indicators that said, yeah, this is trustable by beacons or social sort of signals that say, yeah, this can be trusted? The second part of the solution space is time. This is one of those things where people know they should do it, but often don't because of the time. Most people know because of the increased awareness of voting. People are wearing "I just voted" pins. It is important to vote, but there's a lot of time involved to get into the issues. Maybe people are more willing to just vote based on their feelings and party affiliation for very big elections like the presidential. But there's a lot of smaller local issues, and definitely for things like statewide ballots, referendums, where there's information that's involved. And so being able to solve for the time, I think, is an under-evaluated design space. And so there's some things that can be involved, such as making it incentives, making it easy to use, having virtue signaling so that you have a better sense of status, ways to promote, accountability for did you vote, in a way that you get rewarded for it, but not for voting a specific way. So I think if those are the two elements of the solution space. Now, because when we talked about there are other people in this ecosystem, such as the organizations and the brands, I think that solution space should involve a way for those institutions to also either onboard more people, to share content that trusts or moderates the type of information. Maybe they're journalists or sort of third-party fact checkers that are incentivized to participate and to gain the trust of others and to indicate that they've reviewed something, and there's sort of a double check or a check and balance to make sure that the fact checkers themselves have been fact checked. And so I think engaging around that is also a very powerful way to build an ecosystem to solve for the citizen. So I think the purpose of this was to talk about the role and importance of thinking about citizens as not just users. We're used to that, but citizens have, just by changing the name, a broader sense of who is impacted by their decisions and the challenges that comes for dealing with it. And we've seen a lot of the problems can boil down to complexity and time. And that the UX, if we had to boil it down, is about accessibility, trust, understanding, and again, solving for time, which could be, they're incentivized to spend the time, they're rewarded for spending the time. So I think this really helps to frame why we want to design for citizens and what's different, and some of the things that we're working on at Assembly. So if you're interested in learning more, go to assembly.digital. All right, until the next episode, thanks.